who decided to come back from the dead.
I remember a karaoke machine, James Faraci, The Last of the Americans, and Lea Michele wanting me to dress up like that punk boyfriend of hers on Glee.
Well, if you want to feel even more miserable, you're 3 days late on your latest review. Judging by your condition, I'm guessing you don't have a damn clue what you were gonna review anyway.
Double.
And oh yeah, the conspiracy theorists are already coming into the area.
Conspiracy theorists? Ah, crap! It's that time of year again, isn't it? And this is the 50th anniversary, so they're here in triplicate, right?
Word is the night manager at the Dallas Sheraton's already checked himself into a mental ward.
Yeah, every year at this time, all these wackos have to come to Dallas spewing and ranting about how our military and government are all plotting against us. And most of them came to be because of that god-awful Oliver Stone movie. Guys, I know what we're gonna do today.
On November 22nd, 1963, the United States suffered one of its greatest tragedies when President John F. Kennedy was shot and killed during a motorcade through the streets of downtown Dallas. Within hours of the president's death, a suspect was apprehended and charged. Lee Harvey Oswald, an employee at the Texas School Book Depository that was near the assassination and a sympathizer of Eastern Bloc communism. However, Oswald never saw trial, as 2 days later, he was shot and killed during a prison transfer by nightclub owner Jack Ruby. With no other suspects to be found, an independent commission led by Chief Supreme Court Justice Earl Warren was selected to solve this case. 10 months after the assassination, the commission concluded that Oswald indeed shot Kennedy from a 6th-floor window of the depository and acted alone in his efforts. This conclusion was not satisfactory for many people, to say the least. And in the half-century that has followed, several people have pursued and suggested theories that Kennedy's death was part of a grander plan, a massive conspiracy, especially after his brother, Attorney General Robert Kennedy, was killed just a few years later. Less than 2 years after the Warren Commission's report was released, New Orleans District Attorney Jim Garrison began his own investigation into the assassination. It only resulted in him charging one prominent civic leader named Clay Shaw with involvement in such a conspiracy, losing that case and eventually his post as DA. But he continued his claims of a conspiracy and smearing of Clay Shaw to the end of his days, thanks mainly to Shaw dying before he could complete a defamation suit against Garrison. In 1988, Garrison wrote On the Trail of Assassins, detailing his views of the investigation and case. When filmmaker Oliver Stone read the book, he proceeded to buy the rights to adapt it into a movie. The result was the 1991 release of JFK, one of the biggest films to ever hit mainstream audiences concerning the Kennedy assassination. And one of the biggest travesties on actual history. This film caused a whole new generation of tinfoil-wearing lunatics to be convinced our government and military are a bunch of evil black hats who silence the president to continue their warmongering, and those wackos keep converging on downtown Dallas and the assassination site at Dealey Plaza, especially each November. And now, with the 50th anniversary of this tragedy having come, we're going to look at why this film is such a travesty. And don't worry, there's a reason a TV critic is willing to go after a movie. We'll get to that later. For now, this is Oliver Stone's JFK. If I listed everything the movie got wrong, we'd be here all day, so I'll just try to cover the big stuff. However, I will mention that John McAdams of Marquette University has documented a lot of information on the Kennedy assassination, and that includes a list of this film's inaccuracies, which you can see for yourself. The movie is actually based off of two books, Garrison's and Crossfire by Jim Marrs, who has written a number of conspiracy books ranging from Nazism coming to America to aliens visiting Earth. So you know this guy is reputable. We open with this quote about how being silent when we should protest makes cowards out of all of us. Good advice! I therefore choose to not be silent and protest this movie. Irony! The actual opening has Dwight Eisenhower's farewell speech where he talks about the military-industrial complex that's supposed to be a plot element in this thing. Then, we get an account of JFK and his apparent plan to peacefully negotiate the US out of the Cold War and conflicts with Cuba and Vietnam. Then, we get actual film from the day of the motorcade with spliced-in fictional footage of this woman getting tossed onto a deserted road only to be rescued and taken to the hospital where she starts raving about how Kennedy is going to be killed. Yeah, this is supposed to be Rose Cheramy, a hooker who claimed she worked for Ruby and that he and Oswald were pals. In truth, she was a nutcase and drug addict who had given the FBI false leads on drug busts in the past. The shooting occurs and we get the news reporting it as we cut to New Orleans and Jim Garrison, played by Kevin Costner. Kevin Costner playing one of the biggest conspiracy nuts out there. Crash Davis would so not approve. We not only see Garrison seeing the reports of JFK's death, but also former FBI man Guy Bannister, played by, Ed Asner, who supposedly knew the culprit Lee Harvey Oswald and has had his files broken into. Garrison has his assistants immediately start digging up acquaintances of Oswald, bringing up the name David Ferry. Once Oswald is killed, they bring Ferry in for questioning, and the movie portrays him as a liar to justify them turning him into the FBI before he gets released for some unknown reason. In real life, the FBI determined the informant who identified Ferry was a drunk and unreliable. Fast forward 3 years where Garrison is on a plane with Senator Russell Long, played by Walter Matthau, who essentially plants the seed of possible conspiracy in Jim's head. I could call out the garbage about all that, but I'm saving it for later. Garrison begins reading over the Warren report that concluded Oswald was a lone assassin, where we start really getting the inaccuracies, like how he claims no one made record of Oswald's interrogation, and that Oswald and Guy Bannister's offices in New Orleans were connected. The investigation starts by interviewing people like Bannister's old friend Jack Martin, attorney Dean Andrews, played by the late John Candy, and convicted male prostitute Willie O'Keefe, played by Kevin Bacon, to determine Oswald Ferry and a Clay Bertrand were all actually involved in a planned operation to go after Castro that Kennedy supposedly ordered shut down. In this film, it's Martin that first reluctantly tips them off to Bertrand, and then Andrews tries to deny Bertrand having any connection. In reality, Martin came to Garrison to suggest Oswald and Ferry's connection. Andrews was the person who first suggested the name Clay Bertrand, only to later admit he made the guy up and was basically someone no one took seriously. Oh, and Willie O'Keefe didn't really exist. He was a character Stone created from 4 real-life, highly uncredible witnesses, including Perry Russo. I'd fly into a rage over that, but that's not the worst such case in this movie. Garrison and his team begin discussing everything they found, and this is where they first suggest that Oswald was framed the whole time, alongside this complete BS sequence of shots of someone fabricating the photo of Oswald that made the cover of Time magazine. There is just so much here that is woefully inaccurate, like saying Oswald had no problem getting his wife Marina out of Russia, that if you've seen it, I suggest going to McAdams' list. The only other thing I will point out is the character of Susie Cox, who is basically the one person most sympathetic to Garrison's cause. Yeah, there were no women lawyers on Garrison's team. We then move to them in Dallas, where they try to disprove the claim that one man could fire 3 shots in less than 6 seconds, I'll get to that later, and interviewing people like Jean Hill, who claims she saw a grassy knoll shooter and was then taken in and intimidated. Hill was one of the more popular sources for conspiracy theorists, and she changed her story greatly over the years to whatever the buffs wanted. Meanwhile, Garrison's assistant, Ben Broussard, declares that Clay Bertrand is actually Clay Shaw, played by Tommy Lee Jones. Garrison interviews Shaw, who was homosexual in this movie and real life, and this is where the movie becomes offensive in more ways than history. This is one of the most homophobic films I have ever seen. It shows most of the people involved with the conspiracy as gay, and even if that was the case for many of those implicated, it shows them as overly stereotypical, foppish, and degenerate. Seriously, Oliver Stone, you make Seth MacFarlane look like someone who knows how to sensibly portray gay people. When Shaw leaks the investigation to the press, Ferry goes ballistic, saying he's a marked man because he's Garrison's chief witness, and spills everything about him, Oswald, Ruby, and Shaw being involved in the operations to whack Castro, and then he's found dead. There's a brief mention about his death possibly being the aneurysm that it was in real life, but it's immediately glossed over by Garrison suggesting he was murdered through force-fed drugs that caused his death, even though the real Garrison always claimed he believed Ferry committed suicide. By the way, in reality, Ferry was the first main suspect Garrison was pursuing. He never confessed any involvement with Oswald or any other conspirators, and Garrison dismissed Clay Shaw as an important piece until after Ferry died. Now, hold your nose, because we're getting deep into the crap now. Garrison travels to Washington to meet with someone who'll only refer to himself as X, played by Donald Sutherland. X says he worked with the Pentagon in '63 and was shipped to the South Pole just before the assassination, then was in New Zealand on the day where he saw a newspaper reporting on Oswald's arrest hours before he was actually charged. He makes this speech with orchestra music playing about how the motorcade security would not have been so terrible had he been in the US to oversee it, and this whole thing was a grand conspiracy to destroy Kennedy's foreign policy, extend the Cold War, and get America into Vietnam, meaning billions of dollars for the military and the people who supply it. This is almost certainly the point in the film where Stone means to turn viewers really into his favor by giving them the grand evil scheme they want to believe, and it's also where the film crosses the most into complete BS, because Mr. X, Oliver Stone made him up. He did not exist. Garrison never met him. He was based on a guy Stone met named Fletcher Prouty, who might have been a Pentagon liaison to the CIA and who told Stone of the New Zealand newspaper and that grand theory based on a JFK study called the Report from Iron Mountain. The newspaper claim is complete bunk because all the papers knew Oswald was in custody hours before he was actually charged. And the Iron Mountain report? political satirist Leonard Lewin admitted in 1972 to have made it up as a joke. Thus, we have possibly the absolute biggest of many huge flaws in the film. When you have to create a completely fictional character among several real-life characters to get the message across of what you want audiences to believe is historically true, you forfeit all integrity. So Garrison arrests Clay Shaw, and people in the government immediately begin questioning his motives, including Chief Justice Earl Warren, who is made to sound like a robot spewing instructions he's being fed. Not surprising, because the man who's playing Earl Warren here, that's the real Jim Garrison making a cameo in this movie. Shilling much, Oliver Stone? As Garrison starts accusing the deaths of Martin Luther King and later Robert Kennedy to the same conspiracy, his wife threatens to leave him, and Garrison's team starts breaking apart over the pressure. And this is where the film actually shoots itself in the foot and makes a good case against a conspiracy. Because Broussard, who is supposed to have been gotten to by the feds to undermine the case, starts saying the most logical things. He says how it makes no sense for Garrison's extremely complex theory to have been kept a secret by so many people. And Garrison can't argue that. He can only point out the flaws in Broussard's theory that it was just the mafia. This is one of the biggest issues I've had with the conspiracy theories. Each one has major flaws that could be filled in by a completely different theory, only that theory has other flaws itself. There are, of course, problems with the lone gunman theory also, but the main issue is this. We have nothing in this movie to convince us that Garrison's extreme, complex conspiracy theory is the right answer, except that that's what he was told by one man in Washington, who again was a completely made-up character. There's a bunch of scenes about how Garrison isn't allowed to reveal evidence on a TV interview, yet you're willing to leak your evidence on TV before trial? You suck as a DA! There's a supposed risk about him being a target, and he responds to Robert Kennedy's death by having fear sex with his wife before we finally get to the trial. All of Garrison's witnesses are brought up and quickly discredited by the prosecution, which is one of the few things that is accurate with reality. And then he gets to the stuff all the conspiracy buffs have wanted to hear and that I have been waiting to jump on. All the so-called physical evidence claiming the impossibility of a lone shooter. And now, speaking on the defense's behalf, Lee Harvey Oswald was an excellent shooter. The claim that he was a poor shot is based solely on his last military test that ranked him as a marksman, excluding the other tests that ranked him from sharpshooter to expert. The allegation of all the shots occurring in less than 6 seconds is false. New evidence from ear witnesses and the Zapruder film reveal the time frame to actually be 8 to 9 seconds. Granted, this means little for the movie, since Garrison claims there were more than 3 shots, except his own claim that the first shot missed. Another of the few things the movie gets right here is one of the main facts to confirm the 8-second frame. There were actually only about 20 witnesses claiming shots from the grassy knoll out of nearly 180 questioned. The ear witness testimony was very split, mainly because Dealey Plaza is an echo chamber. 44% of the witnesses couldn't say where the shots originated. However, the majority of those who could say where they thought the shots came from said there were 3 shots coming from the area of the depository, more than twice the number of people picking the grassy knoll. Acoustics experts have said that if a shot was fired from the knoll, way more people would have picked it because of its closer proximity, and only 4 witnesses claimed that shots came from more than one location. Forensic experts have confirmed that the human head will in fact go back into the left if it is shot from that angle at that distance. The magic bullet claim is crap. It assumes the 2 targets were sitting completely in line with one another military style, which was not the case. case. Kennedy was sitting slightly to Connolly's right and a few inches higher due to the special seat for his back problems, and Connolly was turning toward the president when that shot came. In fact, the surgeon that operated on Connolly told the Morning News that his turning toward Kennedy likely saved his life. Now yes, much of what I have said likely wasn't known in 1969, so Garrison's arguments can still hold within the setting of the movie. The problem is, most of these claims could be debunked in 1991, but there is not even the hint of Garrison possibly being wrong before, during, or after the film. The audience is being made to believe that everything Jim Garrison says is correct using evidence that is either outdated, false, or just flat out made up. Oliver Stone, you are failure! So of course, Clay Shaw is found not guilty in the end, with at least one juror saying they believe there is a conspiracy, but they just can't prove Shaw is involved. The film doesn't mention Garrison's case was so poor that the jury took just 45 minutes to reach the verdict, and that included 25 minutes of bathroom breaks. As Garrison vows to keep fighting for the truth and walks out with his family, rather than throw a fit in his office like the real Garrison did, the movie ends with a number of other claims in text scroll, including mentioning how the House Select Committee in 1979 determined there was a second shooter in Dealey Plaza, but the Justice Department did nothing to follow up on it. The House Select Committee based its second shooter finding on one dictabelt recording of a police microphone that had no bullet sounds, but two acoustics experts claimed had sound impulses indicating a fourth shot. After their report was released, the FBI and the Ramsey panel, at the request of the Justice Department, determined the recording did not come from a motorcycle in the motorcade, as they claimed, and the recording took place a minute after the shooting. The committee was going to come to the lone gunman conclusion until they got that false information. Oh, and there's also this added bit for the DVD pointing out how this movie drove Congress to release more information on the assassination. So that was JFK, the worst piece of propaganda to hit theaters in my lifetime. There will always be creative liberties taken with facts and history when it comes to movies and other forms of entertainment. But the main issue I take with this film is its intent. Even with everything Titanic got wrong with history, and just watch Confused Matthew's review for more on that, you could always argue that Cameron never intended to make audiences think that what happened in that movie was reality. He was just using a historical setting to tell a melodramatic work of fiction. Irresponsible, but not misleading. The same can be said for Disney's Pocahontas. While Disney did take their own creative liberties, they were adapting the tall tales of John Smith and Pocahontas and not the actual history. And again, we're doing it just for entertainment. There is no doubt Oliver Stone's intent was to make people believe this is what really happened. He defends everything he put in the film to this day, and let me remind you, this is a guy who said bad movies made by corporate studios gave the 9/11 terrorists their motive. And yet there are still some people who believe what he says. The film has an 84% rating on Rotten Tomatoes, admittedly for its cinematography, cast, and story build-up, but even that site calls its history reference dubious. Huge understatement! This thing is loaded with false information from beginning to end. Information that could be disproven at the time it came out. Everything the Jim Garrison character argues to the jury is also Oliver Stone arguing to the audience. And because so many were not willing to do research, they believed it at face value, and it's responsible for a new generation of nutcase Fox Mulder wannabes. The good news is that while there were people who became fans of this film for its message, it also had many detractors who called it out for its bullcrap. And one of those had just the forum to get his own message out. We'll take a look at that next.